Welcome everyone that has just joined us as Manny, and welcome to Manny's Super Civic Cyber Conversations, where we're continuing our goal of civically engaging the public, especially in this time of need. And today we are joined by Max Patinkin and Evan Wiig. I knew it had two I's in it, but I forgot the first letter. Who are both really amazing and quite earnest. And we're going to talk about the effect of all this on farms and the farm world, something that not everyone thinks about, but is extremely important to our daily life. So welcome, Evan, and welcome, Max, to the show. I guess it's a show. Yeah, hi.
Excellent, glad to be here.
And welcome to the participants. Can all the participants just give me a little clap, raise your hand? There's a little hand raising button so I can just see who's here. Jay-Ann, Mary, Sophia, hello. Jay-Ann, Joe, Allison, everyone, Julia, Elise, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Sophia, hi. Get right into it. We're gonna talk about, I need some help because I don't really understand all the different pieces of farm world and how it interacts with me as a consumer or different commercial networks. So I know that there's a commercial food network and then there's a direct-to-consumer. So Max, can you explain to me the food production system as it relates to the commercial food
Sure.
network?
All right. So hi, everyone. I'm Max Patinkin. I guess kind of a colleague of Manny's, helped launch the great thing that is Manny's.
You are not a colleague. You are like my Yoda.
One of many, I'm sure. But so this subject is near and dear to my heart. My family runs two different family farms. We run one in Illinois, which is Red Angus cattle. We also raise corn and soybeans. And for lack of a better way of saying it, even though it's a family farm, we are a commercial family farm. We sell into the commercial system. And then on the other side of my family, my mother is the owner and operator of Vermont Wagyu, and she raises Wagyu cattle in the Green Hills of Vermont. And she sells directly to mostly restaurants, and then a little bit into farmers markets and direct-to-consumer on her e-commerce platform. So when Manny came to me and wanted to chat about a subject on this great civic series, the first thing that jumped to my mind is something we don't think about a lot as urbanites, and that is where does our food come from? And how is the current situation impacting those food supplies? The good news is it's not really impacting the food supply, it is impacting on how that food gets to us. So on the commercial side, we can concentrate.
Before you get to commercial, I made a mistake. I was supposed to give you guys the opportunity to introduce yourself. So because it's a niche subject. So before you do that, Evan, can you tell us a little bit about CAF and what you do at CAF?
Yeah, sure thing. So small world, actually, you mentioned Wagyu cattle. I got my start on an organic cattle ranch raising Wagyu, which is not a breed you see every day. So a nice little connection there. My name is Evan Wiig, and I work with Community Alliance with Family Farmers, also known as CAF. We've been advocating for family farms and sustainable agriculture here in California for over 40 years. It's everything from on-the-ground programs, helping farmers better their practices, get access to markets, to political advocacy in Sacramento and DC, trying to give small farms and sustainable agriculture a voice in that process.
Nice. Awesome. Great. Okay, so help me understand. Commercial food system. Max, what does that look like?
So the first thing to think about is there's different cogs in the wheel here and in the production system. The first is your farmers, and we can take that in the big picture. It's common to think of ag these days as some big corporate thing, but in reality, 98% of farms are still family farms. And that's tricky though, because what does that really mean? There's small farms, medium-sized farms, and large farms. And so farms like mine in Illinois, which sells into the commercial system, is a medium-sized farm. And we raise these products and then we sell into your distributors, who then sell into your traders or your regional processing plants, your packing houses, your canneries, all those type of facilities, who then continue it down the chain to your distributors, your wholesalers, and eventually to your retailers. And that comes in two forms. If Manny's wasn't the great organic focused civic space that it is, he would probably get his food from a distributor who would, the restaurant would process it in, and it hit his table. And the opposite side of that is feeding into your grocery store chain. So that's the commercial system, and kind of the big picture is your inputs, your farm systems,
Right.
and then all the way through a series of middlemen, processors, packagers, distributors, wholesalers to the retail. And that's a lot of moving pieces. Go ahead.
So it's 98% of farms are still family farms. Is that true?
It is. It's a tricky number, but
Like a big
and it's tricky because
farm bearing family that like technically is a family farm but own like a buck ton of them.
well, so that's where it gets tricky. So 98% of farms are still family farms, but the vast majority of that number are small farms that don't present a huge amount of the general output.
Do we know what percentage of farmland is owned by family farms?
I don't know that number, but I can tell you an output that roughly 3% of farms equate to about 45% of total production. Okay. And then the 3% of corporations present 10 to 15% of total production. So what you end up seeing is 50 to 60% of the bucket gets filled by the larger production facilities. And that's trending that way because it's hard to be a farmer. It's a tough job. And so more and more you're losing small farms and mid-sized farms, and they're aggregating acreage into larger farms. And part of that is, and we can end this in a second, but part of that is the fact that it's just tough. A lot of millennials and Gen X don't want to be farmers. Yeah. And also the cost of running a farm is high. Yeah. I don't know if you've ever heard of a combine, but that is like your main harvester for medium-sized and larger farms. And those cost like $300,000 to $500,000 for one piece of equipment.
Okay, Evan, what about the direct-to-consumer side of the farm system?
Yeah, so these are your more direct opportunities to purchase in a shorter supply chain or direct from the farm. So this is when you go direct to the farmer at the farmer's market. This is where you join a CSA, which is called community supported agriculture, where you pay in at the beginning of the season. You get a weekly subscription to a box of produce, whatever's coming off the farm at the time. This is restaurants that purchase direct from farms. Or some of the local food hubs that aggregate from a number of small farms and then distribute to a network of local food, farm-to-table type institutions around, say, for instance, the Bay Area.
I feel like I saw a lot more people trying to sell me those green boxes like a couple of years ago, and now like I never see them and I don't know anyone that gets them. Was there like a farmer's box surge / golden era that I missed or something? Or I just tuned out?
What you're probably referring to was a couple of years ago. CSA has been around since the 1980s, but about five or so years ago, there were a number of tech startups that had a lot of venture capital behind them. That basically took the farmers the CSA kind of ethos and marketing scheme and created these produce box schemes with the same feeling of a CSA without the actual ethics and production values of it. And now all that money's drying up and most of those companies are going out of business.
Sounds like a story I'm familiar with. Okay, So let's get to the topic of the day, which is COVID-19 and the coronavirus. And if you could help me understand, how has this pandemic affected both the commercial farm network and the direct-to-consumer production network? Maybe Matt, let's start with you on the commercial side.
Sure. So on the commercial side, I was talking to several different farmers from our area and then in Vermont, just trying to get a sense of how it's impacting them generally and directly. On the commercial side, it is still an impact. You have your health and safety concerns. And if somebody gets sick and you're a farmer and you run your own business, it's not like you can easily call somebody to take up your shift and take care of your cattle, your poultry, and your produce, plant your fields, whatever it is. Right. So that's still a big impact. But at the same time, your revenue is still to a certain degree locked in. Your prices are down. So a lot of farmers around this time of year and a month or two earlier are locking in future prices on sales, which we just did in Illinois. So you get a sense of how much revenue you're going to have down the line to a certain degree based on what you're going to produce. Yeah. And because cattle prices are down 15%, corn's down 10%, soybeans are down 8 or 9%. A lot of farms in the Midwest and in the plains are really impacted by that. And that will have just kind of an economic impact, but it's not, you lose the farm for the most part. It's important and it's negative, and there needs to be support for those communities, kind of like there was during the Trump trade war. We should definitely call it the Trump trade war, but it's not the end of the world necessarily.
I should just say, if anyone is cooking up questions in their head and they have thoughts or questions, there's a little Q&A button on the bottom. We're going to open it up to questions in 10 minutes, but you can start filtering in those questions right now to the panel, to the attendees who are here. Okay, Evan, the Community Alliance with Family Farmers. This is like such a central organization in the midst of it all. How is COVID affecting your organization, your work, and also the direct-to-consumer part of this whole supply chain?
Well, what we're seeing right now is really a lopsided impact. It's really not affecting all farms the same. On one side, you see a lot of farms who are really struggling. Any farm that was selling direct to restaurants, to local food hubs or aggregators that were selling to those restaurants, I mean, all those accounts are dried up just suddenly. We have a whole farm to school program where we help small family farms connect to school cafeterias, trying to get more locally grown fresh fruits and vegetables into school cafeterias. All that's gone. So people who really relied on that, as well as a lot of the wholesale accounts, they've suddenly lost, half to their entire sales outlets. Meanwhile, folks who are running those CSAs that I was mentioning, folks who are selling direct through e-commerce and direct to the consumer at farmers markets, things like that, they're actually seeing a huge boon in sales. I was just talking to somebody from the Tahoe Food Hub, which is an aggregator up in the Tahoe area. They're selling at 600% of their usual volume, which is just crazy. Because
people go to the grocery stores and the farmers markets to get their food now. They're not going to restaurants as much.
They're not going to restaurants, and they also recognize, I think they're more concerned about their health. They're more concerned about getting food from somebody they know, and they can guarantee where it came from. You go to the farmer's market, for instance, and that food is passed through one or two hands before it's gotten to you. Whereas at the grocery store, you have no idea where it's come from. And who wants to go into a crowded Costco with people, starting fistfights over toilet paper, when you can go to direct to a farm that can deliver that produce in a box.
Have you seen the farm operations change a lot because of COVID? And Max talked about how if someone gets sick, it's really hard to replace them on a farm. Are you seeing with your network of farmers, folks still being able to produce without being impeded at all?
So far, we haven't heard that many.
Space on a farm, I feel like social distancing is a lot easier on a farm.
Yeah. So I mean, as far, at least within our network, we haven't heard any very many stories of direct impact or farm workers getting coronavirus. Not to say that it's not happening. We haven't heard that. I think the bigger impact is the way that they're handling sales and stuff like that. For instance, the farmers markets, they're requiring. At a number of the farmers markets, they're requiring 2 people at every single stall, so that one person can handle all the money and the transactions, and the other person can handle all the food. And so that makes a big difference, because a lot of these farmers are operating on razor thin margins, and to hire 2 people to work one farmer's market, that just doesn't fit into the business model of a lot of these small businesses.
Right. Well, so it seems like there's some ups and some downs, right? And clearly some major downs, given that restaurants are all closed, schools are all closed. If they're doing any catering to large events, that's not happening. And obviously that definitely affects the commercial market network as well. So let's talk about what's being done to help these farmers. Can you guys fill me in on what's happening on the federal side and then maybe on the state and local side as well? And then actually pause, like, what would you like to see happen? Like, if you had a magic wand and you were wearing your magic crown, your magic farmer crown, like, what would you say is needed now and what's not being done?
Sure. So, I mean, I can certainly take that up. So, we're in addition to supporting farmers directly, we're an advocacy organization. So, through the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition and our own work in Sacramento, we're pushing lawmakers to not forget about family farms, not to not forget about local economies. And just like a lot of people are right now, pushing our representatives to make sure that if we're going to be putting trillions of dollars into a bailout, that money isn't going to just a handful of banks and large corporations, but that it actually is providing low interest loans to small businesses, and making sure that we have things like SNAP and food assistance for those who are insecure. If I had a magic,
do you know if this package that is being talked about has anything for farmers?
For farmers, yes. So even from the very beginning, there were vague wording and budgets in the stimulus packages, but exactly how that's going to get doled out, we don't know. But if you take the last few stimulus packages, or for instance, the money that came through Trump's trade war,
Right.
what we saw happening over and over again was the money that was set aside to help farmers was
Right.
predominantly going to the wealthiest farmers, the small handful of farmers that own the majority of the land, and not really getting to those small farms. The folks you saw at the farmers market selling produce, they were not getting the subsidies that were coming through, say, for instance, the trade war.
Do you see that changing in Nancy's bill, in the bill that she proposed yesterday?
I think there's going to be a better chance for sure, but again, we need to see the devil's in the details. We have to see that is in there. But what we're pushing for, and since you asked if I had a magic wand and I could wave it and ask anything,
I wish I could put a magic wand on you with Zoom. I can't. I feel like I would give you one.
What we'd like to see is money coming in to buy products from farmers who've lost accounts, and then providing that food to food banks. Because the problem that we have here is we can't go to these small farm businesses that, like I said, are operating, one or two farmers markets away from getting into the red, and asking them to donate to food banks, which we're inevitably going to be needing when we hit this recession that's inevitable just around the corner here. We need to make sure that we're providing funds for the small farm businesses to stay open, and then providing that to the food banks to say, for instance, the busboy who lost his job at a restaurant because of all this. So a more holistic approach.
Right. Okay. In our last 3 minutes, can we talk a little bit, Max and Evan, about what the people who are listening in now and the people who will be listening, the millions of people who will be listening to this when we post it to YouTube and Facebook and on our podcast, what can they do, the average person, to help their farmers, to help the farmers that are being affected right now?
So let me jump in, and I want to just tack on to the prior conversation. There's going to be a variety of SBA-focused relief in the packages, and those will be geared more towards urban areas. But SBA loans and disaster relief loans have in the past been applied to farms, and ensuring that those loans are available to farmers, because this is, as Evan was mentioning, really a crisis of small farms, is going to be one of the most important things. And those components really need to have grant components, because small farms, this is kind of you can't eat twice at a restaurant that's been closed for the last 90 days to make up their revenue. So to a certain degree, there needs to be just grants and or debt relief on zero interest loans, those kind of things, to make up the bucket of just lost revenue, because all these farms still have their carrying costs. Unlike a retail store or a cafe, you can't just furlough workers, put them on unemployment, which is unfortunate, but allows the workers to get unemployment because you still have all of those natural elements of your farm to operate. So farms like ours in Vermont Wagyu, you really are sitting in a situation where we have all of our costs and maybe 20% of our revenues. Now we're scrambling, and we're talking now about what the consumer can do to create relationships more directly to the consumer and not just direct to the restaurant. And a lot of farms don't have those relationships. And part of that is a time allocation issue, and part of that is a resource allocation issue. If you were a part of a CSA, and these, as Evan said, these have been around for a while, that's fantastic and your business is booming. But a lot of farms, and I would say probably the majority of smaller organic focused farms, aren't either directly next to a metro area of a Bay Area size and have access to those CSAs currently. So what's hard for the consumer is to say, all right, it's easy for me to think that if I can jump into a CSA, that's solving some of the problem. And it is to a degree, and I certainly encourage everyone to do that. But I also encourage you to look out and try to find farms nearby that maybe have an e-commerce platform, maybe do, and I know, Evan, that you probably worked on this, I believe, in the past, the virtual farmers markets, where farms that don't have as much of a distribution network can tie into one virtually. I think there's some in the Bay Area. I'll defer to you on that. Elements where you're basically trying to get off of the beaten path a little bit to hit the farmers that need you the most.
Okay, so we've got a lot of questions, but just to sum that up, visit your farmer's market. And there are a lot of farmers markets in San Francisco. And operator, if there's a map of local farmers markets in San Francisco, can we please send that to the participants now? Join a CSA, and Evan would love to know how to do that. Buy directly from farms via e-commerce and purchase gift cards. To questions. First, Joe, how have restaurant closures impacted the farming industry? Wow, English, so hard for me right now. And can farmers who sold to the restaurant industry shift and find other customers? Is it easy to shift from the restaurant industry to a different industry?
Yeah, so I actually just got off the phone with the folks at Feed Sonoma. So there's a food hub based out of Petaluma called Feed Sonoma. And what they did was they aggregate from a number of over, I think, 80 different farms around the North Bay, small family farms. Mm-hmm. And they sold to restaurants, they sold to corporate cafeterias, and as of within a matter of 1 week, they lost over 90% of their business. And this is kind of one of those keystone businesses where that one business, there's 80 businesses relying on that one business.
Yeah.
And so in less than a week, they've scrambled together to start what they're calling feed bins, which are essentially produce boxes that you can order, and they aggregate from a number of different farms, and they drop off and deliver.
Does it work?
So what we're seeing right now is a lot of farmers scrambling to come up with new business models. In some cases, like a cooperative venture like Feed Sonoma, they have a little bit more capacity and the collaboration buy-in from the farmers. In some cases, you've got farmers and farmers markets who are scrambling to come up with e-commerce on the fly. But again, when you're dealing with perishables, it's a lot easier because you can't just order widgets and send them out like Amazon. It's a little trickier to manage that supply and demand.
Okay, we've got a lot of questions, so I'm gonna get to the next one. Julia, great question, kind of long, so I'm gonna read it. Farmers can't change their supply at this point because we don't control the seasons. Assuming because you used we means you're a farmer. Hello, farmer. Is the food that consumers get in a CSA different than the food that large-scale operations, i.e. grocery stores, restaurants, distributors, demand? I assume that this correlation would impact how large the switching costs are going from large-scale operation demand to CSA demand.
Yeah, I mean, you can't change a cropping plan for most cropping plans at this point. It's not like changing the menu at a restaurant to adjust for fluctuations in demand. Most fields have already been planted at this point. Most crop plans have already been designed. There's still some wiggle room in terms of what they can change, but for a CSA, you're really designing your entire farm from the very beginning of the season to account for feeding 100 different families over the course of a whole year. So it's a really specific design that takes a lot of intention, and to just change course immediately, it's a tough one. It's a long-term business model.
Yeah, and to piggyback on that, it goes further in a meat production. You basically reserve slots in food processing and harvesting facilities months in advance. Mm-hmm. So hog, cattle, poultry that you were planning, as Emma was saying, a lot of these producers sell directly to universities, to cafeterias, et cetera. And when you're harvesting, you've scheduled harvesting in a certain way. To then shift it to a CSA means a completely different style of harvesting and packaging and distribution. And that puts a lot more cost on the farm to be able to get their product basically into the hands of the consumer.
Got it. All right. Elise has got two questions. Do either of your farms practice regenerative or sustainable practices? And also, other than subscribing to CSAs, how can we as city dwellers support local family farms, and how can we sign up?
So I'm no longer farming myself, but we at CAF have a whole climate smart farming program. So right now, we work with hundreds of farmers across California to implement practices that sequester carbon, that reduce erosion, that increase the bioactivity of the soil. So we work with regenerative farms from San Diego to Humboldt, in addition to supporting advocacy that provides incentives for farmers to make that transition.
Awesome. And Max, what about your farms?
Both farms, absolutely. The Vermont farm is probably a better example of it. My mother is a very passionate person on both the environment and sustainable farming.
Awesome.
So our pastures are very well monitored. We do rotational grazing to really kind of augment the soil and use all sorts of, we basically do not use any added components. So it's no GMO free, no steroids, no hormones, none of that kind of nature.
So Evan or Max, how do you sign up for a CSA? Like if I wanted to join one in San Francisco, how do I do that?
So you find out which the CSAs that are currently operating. You can jump on their websites, so you can sign up there. There's a number of different farmers. What's that?
Is that on the CAF website? Which ones are operating?
Well, so we're actually, speaking of scrambling to change business models, we're actually scrambling to put together a directory right now of CSAs.
Okay, great.
Around California. We don't have that up, but we hope to have that up in the next 2 weeks.
Amazing.
But you can check out. There's this number. Depends on where you're located, obviously, and which ones sell direct. But
Okay.
And
So
I would encourage you, depending on what region you're in, to just Google it. There are a lot of groups getting together, banding together out of solidarity to distribute as a CSA that are farms that typically didn't have CSAs. We've been talking about previously. So those are existing all over. I was talking to a farmer who just joined one in New Hampshire, Three Rivers. And so there's ways to find these sources all over, and just encourage you to take some time.
Got it. A lot of questions. So I'm going to get to the next one. Laura Brooklyn, is there a way for the food that was previously going to restaurants to be provided to feed kids or families that were on free and reduced lunch programs, or those who are experiencing food insecurity? Could donations to food banks and school food programs go to farmers?
So that was what I wanted to do with my magic wand.
Yeah.
I will. Sorry to go.
Oh.
I will say there's organizations, individuals, philanthropic organizations that are looking to do that currently. I spoke to somebody yesterday who's they've been pledged $1 million to go out to small farms, basically serve as a government in this circumstance, acquire the different production facilities, or not facilities, but products, and then distribute it to food banks in the Bay Area.
Okay. Is there someone? Okay, we'll pause on that. Daisy, hi Daisy. How can we ensure that farm workers are covered adequately with sick leave, health insurance, and unemployment as well during this time? Are they currently included in the draft bills for the Corona recovery?
So I don't know if they're in the current draft of the bill, but I think this is one of the things that we as a country really need to grapple with, is where those costs fall. If you look at places like Denmark and how they're dealing with it, the government is actually stepping in with a social safety net to make sure that small businesses that, like we've mentioned a number of times, are so close to the red, are actually assisting to keep those keep their employees on the payroll without having to shut down. But again, But again, the farm workers, we're still producing food. You know, I mean, I don't think it's not like a restaurant that's shutting down and just ceasing operation. So most of the farm workers that we know of are still with a job. It's just about finding new markets for that.
And
food.
how long do you think, and this is a question from JN, I don't know your full name, but JN asking was basically, how long do you think they can last for both Max and Evan? How long can these farms last in this current state of affairs?
I would say that's one of the biggest concerns. Small farms, even medium-sized farms, are looking at a big cash burn, and that is going to be the real crisis. And it's the same with small business across the spectrum, but there's only so many months and really weeks that you can burn and carry the same cost basis without supplementing your revenue.
So just one final question, which is ending on a positive note. How are you seeing all the, just some stories of resilience or hope, farmers that are doing really exciting, interesting things in the current crisis to kind of shapeshift and make it work?
I mean, we're seeing incredible stories all over California. Like I said, while the restaurants are shuttering and the school cafeterias are no longer serving, we are seeing an explosion in sales for things like CSAs and direct market. And while the farmers market might not look the same, the music is gone, the mingling is gone, there's all these new sanitation requirements. People are showing up to support their local farms because they recognize that investing in their local economy is an investment in the resilience of their local community. And that in and of itself is inspiration enough for me to keep going.
Amazing. And what about you, Max? Any stories that you're hearing out in the farm world that are giving you some hope and inspiration?
Seeing farmers band together in a cooperative way to augment distribution directly to consumers is powerful. I mean, that is not something that typically people do. You're often competing with each other, and instead people are banding together.
Amazing. Hey, before we end, Evan, where can we find the link to the virtual farmers markets that you mentioned earlier for folks who are, we're sheltering in place, we're not supposed to leave for non-essential things. Obviously, food is essential, but you said that there was a virtual farmers market somewhere where people can order from.
So I think Max had mentioned that, but so I think there are a number of different programs and software systems that farms can use. But what I would encourage you to do is just to look up. You can look up Local Harvest if you want to look for a directory of CSAs and farmers markets. That's a really good resource. But also just find out what some of those local farms are. And if you want to learn more about what we as an organization are doing to support farmers, you can just visit us at caff.org. That's CAFF.org.
Awesome. So real quick to those who are listening, we have 4 events coming up tomorrow. At 1 p.m., we have the role of the San Francisco Chronicle right now with the editor-in-chief, Audrey Cooper. At 3 p.m., we have How to Use Organizing to Beat Donald Trump with Indivisible San Francisco lead Aaron Fisher. Then we have How the City is Addressing Homelessness During the COVID-19 Crisis with Jeff Kaczynski, who's the Director of Homelessness Services. And finally, at 7 o'clock, we have How to Keep San Francisco Weird During a Standstill with everyone's favorite broadcast Stewart. Before we end, please, all who are participating, check the chat box with the link to join Manny's as a sponsor. It's $36 a month, and we're asking everyone who's tuning in to please click the link, joinit.org/o/Manny's. It's in the chat box, and you're going to get it in your email tonight to become a Manny's sponsor and help us make it through this time. We need your help. We need your support to allow us to continue doing these conversations. Thank you so much, Evan and Max, 2 wonderful, wonderful people working hard to support our farmers. Really appreciate your time. I appreciate the time of the people who've tuned in. Thank you all so, so much, and have a really, really good night. Thanks, everybody.
Night.